Imagine you wake up one morning and your coffee costs twice what it did 3 years ago. Your rent is up. Your groceries are up. Your electricity bill looks like a phone number. And when you ask someone why, they say something like, supply chain disruptions, or monetary policy. And you just nod, because what else do you do? Here's the thing nobody tells you. The answer is actually simple. Not easy, but simple. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a price tag the same way again. This is the story of why everything gets more expensive. And it starts with something that doesn't exist. Money. Real money, the kind you can hold, spend, trust, has to mean something. For most of human history it did. You had gold coins, silver, things with actual physical scarcity. You couldn't just make more of them because you felt like it. Then, about 100 years ago, the world made a decision. A very big, very quiet decision. It decided to untether money from anything real. In 1971, Richard Nixon officially ended what was called the gold standard. From that point forward, the US dollar, and by extension, most of the world's currencies, was backed by nothing except trust. A government promise. A collective agreement that this piece of paper or this number on a screen means something. That sounds scary. And maybe it should. Because here's what happens when money isn't tied to anything physical. The people who control the printing press can make more of it whenever they want. And they do. Now here's where we explain this like you're 5. Imagine a small town. There are 10 people in the town. There are also 10 apples. Each apple costs $1. Simple. Clean. Everyone can get 1 apple. Now imagine someone drops $20 more into the town. Out of nowhere. Magic money. But there are still only 10 apples. What happens? The apples don't multiply. The apples don't care about the money. The apples are still 10 apples. So now you have $30 chasing 10 apples. The price goes up. Maybe $2 each. Maybe 3. The apples didn't get better. The apples didn't get rarer. You just have more money trying to buy the same number of apples. That is inflation. In its purest, most honest form. And the uncomfortable part? That magic money didn't fall from the sky equally. Someone got it first. Someone spent it before the prices adjusted. And everyone who had savings, everyone who held on to their dollars, quietly got poorer without anyone taking a single thing from them. Now let's make this real. In 2020, the United States government, in response to a global pandemic, injected roughly $5 trillion into the economy. Some of it went to individuals. Stimulus checks. Some went to businesses. Some went to financial markets. In less than 2 years, the US money supply grew by about 40%. 40%. The economy, the actual goods and services available, did not grow by 40%. It barely grew at all. Some sectors contracted. So you had dramatically more money. Roughly the same amount of stuff. And then people acted surprised when the price of eggs doubled. By 2022, the US was experiencing inflation rates of around 9%, the highest in 40 years. Europe was worse. The UK hit double digits. And here's the irony that should make you pause. The money was printed, at least in part, to help ordinary people. To keep the economy from collapsing. To make sure people could pay rent and buy groceries. And the side effect of that help was that rent got more expensive and groceries cost more. Good intentions. Messy outcomes. That's a theme we'll come back to. But wait. Inflation isn't only about printing money. That's the clean version. The real version has more layers. Layer 2, supply and demand shocks. The pandemic didn't just release money into the world. It also broke the global supply chain. Factories in China shut down. Ships couldn't dock. Truck drivers couldn't work. The ports of Los Angeles looked like a parking lot for container ships, hundreds of them, anchored offshore, waiting to unload. So at the exact moment when governments were pumping money into consumer pockets, more dollars chasing goods, the goods themselves became harder to get. You had more demand and less supply. Simultaneously. At a global scale. That is the economic equivalent of lighting a fire and pouring gasoline on it at the same time. The price of a used car in America went up 40% in 1 year. Lumber tripled. Shipping a standard container from Shanghai to Los Angeles went from about $2,000 to over $20,000. Businesses had no choice but to pass those costs on. They always do. Layer 3. This one is quieter. More insidious. It's called price-wage spiral. And once it starts, it is genuinely hard to stop. Here's how it works. Prices go up. Workers, rightly, demand higher wages to keep up. Businesses raise wages. But now their costs are higher. So they raise prices. Workers see prices going up again. They demand higher wages again. Businesses raise prices again. Around and around it goes. The classic example is the 1970s. Oil prices spiked after OPEC cut production. That raised the cost of everything, because everything is made and moved using energy. Workers demanded raises. Companies raised prices. Inflation hit 14%. Interest rates had to go to nearly 20% to break the cycle. The cure was a brutal recession. Sound familiar? Because between 2022 and 2024, central banks around the world did the same thing. They raised interest rates aggressively. The Federal Reserve took rates from near zero to over 5% in just over a year. Mortgage rates doubled. Loans became expensive. Businesses pulled back. The inflation slowed. But the cost of borrowing, of buying a house, starting a business, carrying credit card debt, went up dramatically. The medicine worked. But the medicine also had side effects. Now here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The part that connects all of this to you, specifically. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. If you own assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, inflation is, perversely, sometimes good for you. Your assets go up in nominal value. The debt you used to buy them gets eroded in real terms because you're paying it back with cheaper dollars. If you rent your home. If you live paycheck to paycheck. If your savings sit in a bank account earning 0.5% interest while inflation is running at 7%, you are losing money every single day. Without spending a cent. Without doing anything wrong. That is the mechanism. And it is not an accident. It is a structural feature of how modern economies are built. Wealthy people figured this out decades ago. They stay ahead of inflation by holding things. Ordinary people hold cash. Cash is the one asset that inflation is specifically designed to destroy. The quiet irony of the whole system is that saving, which every financial advisor tells you to do, which feels like the responsible thing to do, is actually penalized when inflation outpaces interest rates. Which it often does. Which it has done for most of the last 2 decades. You do everything right. You still fall behind. That is not a personal failure. That is arithmetic. So what happens next? In 2025 and into 2026, inflation in most developed economies has cooled significantly. Central banks declared a qualified victory. Some started cutting rates again. But here's what cooling inflation actually means. It means prices are rising more slowly. Not that they came down. Prices almost never come down. The eggs that doubled in price, those eggs are still expensive. They just stop getting more expensive quite as fast. That is what victory looks like in this system. A slower rate of loss. Housing affordability is at generational lows in most Western countries. The cost of a home relative to median income has never been worse. A generation of people who did everything they were supposed to, got educated, got jobs, saved, are finding that the math simply doesn't add up anymore. And here's where it gets genuinely complicated. If you lower interest rates too fast to help those people buy homes, you risk reigniting inflation. If you keep rates high to control inflation, you lock people out of the housing market. There is no clean solution. Every lever has a cost. Every policy helps someone and hurts someone else. Which brings us to the deepest, most uncomfortable truth of this entire story. The system isn't broken. This is the system working exactly as designed. It was designed by people with assets. It tends to work for people with assets. And it tends to make the people without assets run just a little bit faster every year just to stay in the same place. The price of that cup of coffee isn't rising because the world is getting worse at making coffee. Coffee farmers haven't forgotten how to grow beans. Your local shop hasn't suddenly lost its ability to make an espresso. The price is rising because the unit of measurement, the dollar, the pound, the naira, the euro, is quietly shrinking. Every year. A little bit at a time. By design. Central banks have an official inflation target. Most aim for about 2% per year. That means the plan, the stated, official, central bank plan, is for your money to lose roughly 2% of its purchasing power annually. That's not a glitch. That's the goal. Over 35 years at 2% inflation, the purchasing power of $1 falls to about 50 cents. Planned obsolescence. But for your savings. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you know the unit of value is shrinking by design, and if you know that the people who own assets are protected and the people who hold cash are not, what does that change about how you think, how you plan, what you do with the next dollar you earn? I'm not going to answer that for you. Partly because the answer is different for everyone. Partly because anyone who gives you a simple answer to that question is probably selling something. But the map is in your hands now. And the price of not understanding it is one you pay quietly, every single month, whether you know it or not.